have one remaining Woodley individual, and he's not going to let her leave the aircraft at this time.
He made me feel very sure that we had a very real and horrifying threat.
We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went.
Hi folks, it's Ryan Burns, and in this video I briefly wanted to discuss what is arguably the most famous lead to have emerged from the FBI's investigation of the Cooper hijacking. Let's talk about the Elsinore Ghost. It's August 1971, and a middle-aged skydiver appeared at the Elsinore Paris Center in Elsinore, California, which is not far from Los Angeles. This man was described as 40 to 42 years old, around 6 feet tall, slim, and with thin, dark brown hair. Amongst the mostly youthful skydiving enthusiasts who frequently made jumps at Elsinore, this man's age made him stand out. On the few occasions he jumped at Elsinore, he curiously wore Cochrane boots, which were jump boots worn by American paratroopers during the 1940s and 50s. But it wasn't his boots or his age that made him memorable to skydiving legend Lyle Cameron. Instead, it was the questions he asked Cameron about how to successfully jump from a commercial airliner. Lyle Cameron was basically a living legend among the skydiving community at the time. He was a constant presence at the Elsinore Paris Center. He was also the chairman of the Parachute Clubs of America and editor of Skydiver magazine. He was 40 years old in late 71, and he had lived a pretty adventurous and varied life up to that point. Originally from Maine, Cameron had dropped out of college to join the Marines, and he served as a Marine airman during the Korean War. Following his discharge, he made his way to the West Coast and settled in Southern California. There he became a member of the LAPD, actually, from 1955 to 1962. As a pioneer in the sport of recreational skydiving, Cameron became a world traveler during the 1960s, competing in and judging international skydiving competitions. His skills as a skydiver even earned him a spot as the technical advisor and lead stunt jumper for the popular TV series Ripcord. This show focused on two skydiving heroes who battled the bad guys. The success of the show Ripcord has actually been credited as having a large influence on the growth of skydiving as a recreational sport. Cameron's life was also filled with intrigue. In 1963, one of Jack Ruby's last phone calls the night before he shot Lee Harvey Oswald was to Cameron. And the purpose of this call remains unknown. As I mentioned earlier, Cameron traveled the world extensively during the 1960s while he was judging these parachute competitions. And due to his international traveling, Cameron was actually recruited by the FBI to act as a potential security informant, with specific focus being his contacts with the Soviets and Soviet bloc citizens. So when Cameron called his local FBI office on November 30th, 1971 to report a possible contact with the Flight 305 hijacker, his experience as a trusted informant caused agents to place significant weight on the information that he was providing. Cameron told agents that in July or August of 71, he talked to a man at the Elsinore Paris Center who closely resembled the sketch. He said that he believed this man had made several jumps at Elsinore during those months. Although Cameron had conversations about parachuting with untold numbers of individuals over the years, he remembered this conversation specifically because no one had ever asked him about jumping from a jet before. According to Cameron, the man asked him about what type of commercial airliner could be jumped, at what speed it could be jumped, and at what altitude would be safest. Cameron explained to the man that the safest way to do so would be to jump from the rear stairs. Additionally, Cameron told the man that lowered landing gear and lowered flaps could be utilized to create drag, thus slowing the aircraft down to a speed that would make it more safe for jumping. This man also asked Cameron about the location of jump centers in Portland and Seattle. Cameron divulged that there was one near Boeing Field in Seattle, and also another one just north of Portland. These are likely references to Issaquah Sky Sports and Western Sport Parachute Center in Orchards, Washington. Cameron told the agents that if the guy had actually jumped previously at Elsinore, then there should be a registration card on file for him. Cameron explained that each person who jumped at Elsinore had to fill out a registration card before jumping. If a jumper was a member of the USPA, that's the United States Parachute Association, their license number would be on the registration card. Cameron told them that in order to receive a USPA license, an individual must submit a photograph of themselves to the USPA headquarters in Monterey, California. 2 days after this first interview, Cameron called the FBI back, claiming to remember another detail. He said that this man must have been a smoker of Raleigh cigarettes because he remembered seeing Raleigh coupons in the man's possession. He jokingly told the man that, hey, he might be able to save up enough of those coupons to buy a PC, that'd be a Para-Commander parachute. Even though Cameron's statement about purchasing a parachute with cigarette coupons was an obvious joke, the FBI still checked with Raleigh to see if they sold parachutes in their coupon redemption catalog. They did not. Cameron once again contacted the FBI on December 9th, perhaps beginning to second-guess himself about the motivation behind the stranger's questions. He stated that he had just been looking through an August issue of Look magazine and noticed an advertisement showing a parachutist jumping from a jet. He speculated that maybe this image had inspired the questions that the stranger had asked him. The advertisement that Cameron was referencing was a U.S. Army recruitment ad featuring a lone paratrooper jumping from a C-130. It's worth noting that a C-130 is not a jet. In an attempt to find another witness to back up Cameron's claims, copies of the sketch and descriptive data about the hijacker were displayed to numerous individuals who had spent time at Elsinore. This group included pilots, jump masters, riggers, mechanics, a dispatcher, and the owners of the jump center. However, none of them were able to remember seeing anyone similar. Desperate for any leads about this mystery man, 12,000 registration cards at Elsinore were reviewed by agents Edward Romanoff and James Pond. They were specifically looking for the cards of men who had jumped at Elsinore since 1969, who were 35 to 55 years of age, 150 to 190 pounds, and 5'8" to 6'1". Searching within those parameters, the agents found 433 cards that matched that criteria. Cameron helped narrow that number down even further when he remembered that his interaction with the stranger definitely occurred in mid or late August 71. This allowed the agents to focus on the flight records of jumps made during that specific time frame. These flight records contain the last names of the jumpers on each flight, the altitude from which they jumped, and the name of the pilot. A review of the August flight records revealed the names of 31 individuals who were also on that list of 433. 16 of these 31 were eliminated rather quickly after Cameron and the Elsinore staff stated that they personally knew these men and that none of them resembled the composite sketch. The remaining 15 individuals were all singled out for a detailed investigation, which included in-person interviews and also secondary interviews with all of their known associates. These men came from a variety of backgrounds and occupations, indicating the broad appeal and popularity that skydiving was enjoying in that era. Among those interviewed were a drugstore clerk, a caterer, an FAA crash site investigator, a construction worker, a hotel manager from Wyoming, and even a Bureau of Narcotics officer. All 15 were eliminated for a variety of reasons, with most being able to provide solid alibis from their workplaces for the day of the hijacking. With all of their persons of interest being eliminated, agents Romanoff and Pond were no doubt discouraged that such an intriguing lead had turned out to be a bust. Nevertheless, as part of their due diligence, they provided a packet containing the 10,000 serial numbers of Cooper's ransom to the Elsinore Paris Center, lest somebody start spinning 20s there that could be checked. Cameron also agreed to publish the sketch and a full FBI description in his next edition of Skydiver magazine. Just a month later, in January 72, Cameron was unceremoniously ousted as the national director of the USPA by a 17-2 vote of their board of directors. He had found himself in hot water after making accusations that the U.S. parachute team were involved in illegal narcotics, which they probably were. The board also voted to strip Cameron of his ranking as an international skydiving judge. The 1980s saw Cameron move to Honduras and start a company called TAM Air that provided charter flights throughout Central America. He also sponsored a small drop zone where he packed and sold parachutes. Unfortunately, on June 19, 1993, Cameron was flying a Cessna with 3 passengers when it lost power over Honduras. While attempting to make a hard landing on a road, the aircraft crashed, killing Cameron and 2 other passengers. So over half a century later, and with Cameron himself no longer around, what is to be made of the fact that the cards failed to find the mystery man? Perhaps Cameron was mistaken about the man actually jumping at Elsinore, so there wouldn't be a card with his name on it. Or could Cameron have made the whole thing up? Indeed, a skeptic like myself may find his story too good to be true. Claiming to remember that the man possessed Raleigh cigarette coupons is such a specific detail that it almost seems a bit too convenient. And yes, the detail about Cooper being a Raleigh cigarette smoker was on all of the wanted posters and in all of the papers at the time. But what would Cameron's motivation be to fabricate this interaction? He gained nothing from submitting the tip, and due to his previous work with the FBI, he would know that lying to agents was a criminal act. Also, the effort that the FBI invested in chasing this lead was a clear demonstration of their confidence in Cameron as a reliable source. So for the FBI's part, they had no reason to suspect that Cameron wasn't being sincere in his retelling of this encounter. Some Cooper investigators have suggested that Cameron created this story because he wanted a juicy tale to put in Skydiver magazine, but this almost certainly wasn't the case. For starters, the story did not appear in any editions of Skydiver magazine, and most importantly, it would perhaps be a crime for Cameron to go public about an active lead. Theoretically, if he had written about the mystery man, then this could have potentially given Cooper a clue that he was close to being identified or something like that. The FBI absolutely advises informants to keep their mouths shut, especially when they're engaging in an active investigation based on their lead. So here we are 50 plus years later with questions that we'll never have the answer to. Did Cameron make the story up? Did he embellish a real encounter that he had? Was he entirely honest in his recollection and the man's questions were merely coincidental? Or is it possible that the hijacker of Flight 305 actually sought out Lyle Cameron for advice and that Cameron inadvertently provided him with the blueprint for the Cooper heist? These are things that we'll never know and will be debated as long as we are discussing the D.B. Cooper hijacking. Personally, I don't believe the Elsinore Ghost was Cooper. My main reason for believing this is based on the timing of an event that occurred just 12 days before the Cooper hijacking. On November 12, 1971, a 27-year-old Canadian named Paul Joseph Cini had commandeered an Air Canada flight with a shotgun and a fake bomb. He demanded $1.5 million for the release of the passengers. Cini also brought on board a parachute, which he had recently purchased and was planning to make a skydiving escape from the aircraft somewhere over the Canadian wilderness once he got his loot. His attempt was poorly executed, though. Cini had picked an aircraft, a DC-8, which would have made it nearly impossible to jump from as it lacked the aft stairs that only existed on a Boeing 727 and the DC-9 jets. He was also drinking throughout his hijacking and quickly became intoxicated. His inebriated state eventually allowed a male member of the crew to bring a swift end to the hijacking when he bludgeoned a distracted Paul Cini over the head with an emergency axe. The FBI firmly believed that Cooper was a Cini copycat, and I'm inclined to believe it as well. The idea that two men were coming up with roughly the same idea for a totally unique heist at the exact same time seems unlikely to me. The Cooper hijacking does feel directly inspired by Cini as far as I can tell. It's as if Cooper was watching TV, saw the Cini story, and had a, "Hey, I can do that, hold my beer" moment. So if Cooper was inspired by Cini's hijacking on the 12th of November, then he almost certainly wasn't mining information from Cameron back in August. With that said, what do I think of Cameron's story? As with most things in the Cooper vortex, it's complicated. I really don't see any benefit to him making it up. I do think his encounter with this man happened to some degree or another. Yet I can't shake the feeling that his inclusion of the Raleigh cigarettes is just way too convenient. It feels like someone telling a tall tale who includes one element too many that suddenly turns their tale completely unbelievable. Then days later, perhaps after he feels bad for all the effort that the FBI are spending on this wild goose chase, he appears to try and walk back any connection to Cooper by suggesting that this guy was just asking questions based on the Army recruitment ad. I've really tried to come up with an opinion that would reconcile all of this, and I've struggled for years to come up with one. But regardless of the veracity of Cameron's claims, my personal belief is that Cooper was a Cini copycat, which essentially precludes him from being the Elsinore Ghost. Anyways, I will talk to you guys again soon. Y'all take care.